I feel like people like to pick and choose what is
Oh,
important and what
yes.
is not.
Absolutely.
And,
Yeah.
Allah dislikes divorce. But like you said, he dislikes many other things that can come above that and why we should
Mm.
get a divorce. And, it's not good enough staying in an abusive relationship because he probably dislikes that more than you leaving.
Or you're leaving an abusive relationship. What are the reasons? Are they logical? Are they valid?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wakes up one morning and they're like, oh, I'm going to go for divorce.
Yeah.
In most cases, they have tried and tried to make it work, right? Especially in our Asian communities, women are expected to make it work,
Yeah.
regardless. Even if they are unhappy, even if they feel unsafe, even if they are being mistreated and hurt, they are told, oh, so what? At least he doesn't hit you.
Mm.
Or so what? He only slapped you once. Or so what? At
Yeah.
least he's providing for you and your family.
Mm-hmm.
So they will completely disregard his abusive behavior and focus on that one thing that is good.
Mm.
And on that basis of
Yeah.
that one good act, which is obligatory on him,
Mm-hmm.
yes, he's providing, but that's his responsibility.
Honestly, yeah.
It's Islamic obligation for him to provide. If he can't provide, then maybe he shouldn't be thinking about getting married.
Exactly.
If he can't provide, if he's not financially stable, or if he's not skilled enough to secure a job, then maybe he shouldn't consider settling down.
Yeah.
Instead of asking the woman, what do you bring to the table, and asking her to split bills,
Mm-hmm.
maybe reconsider whether you're ready for marriage at
Exactly.
this point, whether you're um, ready to take on the responsibilities of marriage,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe you don't have enough to hire a cleaner or a maid, and you think, oh, marriage is a solution. I can get a full time carer for my parents, or I can get a maid who will do everything around the house, and she will also help me with finances
Yep.
by having a 9 to 5 job where she can split the bills, because in the end of the day, how much can I do as a man?
Mm.
But as a woman, she should be doing everything, looking after the children,
Yeah.
groceries, laundry, cleaning, cooking, and also a
So
job.
everything that I do as a man, as well as what a woman should do, and the entire family.
She should do more.
Yeah.
See, the expectations you have from Asian women is far more than what men usually in our culture do.
Yeah.
I
Oh.
mean, in all, come on, how many brothers do you know who, after working from a 9 to 5 job, also come home and they do laundry
Mm.
or take the bins out? Yes, we have a lot of brothers who do that. I'm not saying that everybody is the same, but how many do it on a regular basis?
Yeah. It's
But
considered
a woman is expected to
something.
come home and straight away start
Exactly.
cooking, preparing a meal, put the children to bed, help them with their homework, do pick and drops from school, do all the school runs, everything else, and then also be always ready and prepared to serve them in every way
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
And no, she shouldn't, she has no right to complain, because when she do so, she is being an ungrateful wife.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just women. We see this pattern in male, for example, when you talk about male victims of abuse,
Mm-hmm.
male victims and survivors of abuse and neglect, you see a lot of women. And recently we had a brilliant documentary on this guy called Richard. I can't remember his surname, but it was a brilliant documentary because that shows how men also suffer abuse. And if the statistics show that 1 out of every 3 women in the United Kingdom are victims of domestic abuse, even 1 out of every 5 men are victims of domestic abuse. The
Mm-hmm.
only difference is women are more vocal.
Mm.
Yeah, they're more expressive. You might go and tell your friend or your work colleague that this is what's going on at home and this is what's making me really upset. But for a man to do that is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
For a man to go into up to his friend or work colleague and say, my wife is abusive,
Mm-hmm.
or my wife hits me, or she gets really aggressive, or she loses it and she starts throwing things and breaking things, or that my wife is threatening me, you know. And you see that a lot, that a lot of men, they spend their entire lives not confiding in anyone because they genuinely believe nobody is going to believe them.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have a few charities and domestic abuse outreach services, especially for
For
men.
men, yeah.
But 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was no such thing. So people wouldn't even acknowledge that a man could be abused. In fact, there are so many memes, on social media about men being hit, and people think it's funny,
Mm,
you know. That's where people are biased and have, double standards, that when a
yeah.
woman is slapped in public, suddenly everybody will turn around and look about, if, say, for example, the same thing happened to a man, his wife or his mother slapped him or hit him, how many people will intervene on the spot? In fact, they'll just laugh it
Mm,
off as if it's funny. So these are some of the, you know, stereotypes and stigmas that still exist in our society,
yeah.
that men don't get abused.
Yeah.
Although you'll be surprised how many boys, they have been sexually abused in their childhood in a madrasa or school,
Mm,
or by an uncle or a neighbor or a family member, but they have just kept quiet because they know nobody's going to believe them,
yeah.
or they will just be blamed
Yeah.
for it.
I guess it's like the society has put a role on them, like an expectation of also the power thing. So men are supposed to be more powerful or more responsible. So how can they get abused? Like how's that a thing? Which is really
But
sad.
that's just a, that this is the irony that, okay, men are supposed to be the stronger sex,
Hmm.
but that strength that we are referring to is physical,
Yeah.
right? We have stories from the lives of the prophets where the prophets sallallahu alaihi wasallam were also abused, right? They had abusive spouses. For
Hmm.
example, Prophet Nuh, his wife didn't support him. Look what she did.
Hmm.
Um, or Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, the whole incident of how a woman advanced towards him in a sexual manner. It shows that a man can be sexually abused as well,
Hmm.
or a man can be taken advantage as well. And just because he is a kind man, a nice person, and he respects women, he will not raise his voice or raise his hand as a result,
Hmm.
because there is reactive abuse as well, right? When somebody has been going through a lot for ages, and a point comes in their life where they're like, I can't take it anymore,
Yeah.
right? So it happens across both the genders, and it at different levels. Sometimes it's a parent or the siblings,
Hmm.
extended family member, even workplace. We can't ignore that. A lot of abuse happens behind closed doors in your
Yeah.
workplace. Gender pay gap, that's a form of abuse.
Hmm.
Um, Favoritism, nepotism in the workplace because of gender, sometimes, or for any other reason. That's workplace abuse. Being bullied at school, being abused at school by a teacher
Hmm.
or a fellow classmate, that's abuse. Um, but the way society works, we're just supposed to get on with it, you
Yeah.
know, keep a brave face. Boys don't cry. Women are supposed to be submissive. We have made these so many like gender
Stereotypes.
associated,
Yeah.
yeah, that this gender should do this
Yeah.
and that gender is supposed to do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, where does it come from? It's not Islamic at all, is it?
No, no, all cultural, all previous societies. Actually, that's a good point to ask then the age-old question of why people don't just leave. So we touched upon it
Mm,
briefly, where you
mm.
mentioned it can be like avoidance, and other factors, but why don't people just leave? Like, what is stopping them from leaving an abusive relationship?
There are tons of reasons. There's not just one factor why people stay in abusive relationships. I mean, in the end of the day, who wants to be, um, in a relationship, especially intimate relationship, with someone you absolutely hate, someone you don't trust,
Hmm.
someone you have lost all respect for. But there's a lot of reasons. Fear of retaliation is one,
Ooh,
and there
yeah.
are so many statistics, like really shocking statistics, that show that I think a woman is killed in the UK every 3 days, and it's always by an ex-partner, an
Mm,
ex-boyfriend, an ex-spouse, or because you are more prone to harm, or there is a more significant risk of harm when you escape
Mm-hmm.
an abusive relationship, because the perpetrator makes it like a egoistic thing,
Mm.
that how dare you leave
Exactly.
me, how dare you walk out on me, how dare you expose me. So there's this revenge
Mm-hmm.
that they want to take. How dare you say no to me? That's something often not talked about. This is even before you get into a relationship, or even before you get married. If somebody advances towards you with a proposal or with any offer, and you say no, because it's your divinely granted right to say no,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can choose. And they turn it into like an ego issue, and they're like, how dare you? So you see a lot of incidents of acid attacks
Mm.
where, out of sheer anger, they have done something to harm a person. Um, Emotional manipulation is another one. Abusers often use gaslighting and guilt to make victims stay. And you see this in trauma bonds that are formed between the perpetrator and the codependent personality or the empath, that they will be hot and cold, hot and cold.
Mm.
So one minute they've lost it. They're like the most horrible, mean person that has ever walked the surface of the earth. And the next minute they're bringing you flowers and chocolates.
Yeah.
And the victim, they get really like confused. And that's how cognitive dissonance
Mm-hmm.
begins. Because you start justifying that person's behavior. He's not horrible all the time, or she's not horrible all the time. It's only when they're stressed or they've had a
Mm-hmm.
long day. Excuses,
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 yeah.
excuses. Um, because you want to live those moments of joy or happiness or contentment, that that person showed, only to keep you in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But then there is a pattern, there is a cycle that you need to look out for, which is one minute they're hot, the next minute they're cold. They will do something horrible, then they will be like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, I apologize. But what kind of apology is this? Because you're doing exactly the same thing the next
Exactly.
day.
Yeah.
So emotional manipulation, okay, you leave, you want to leave, you can leave, but then, I've got a lot of things that I can use against you.
Mm.
I've got pictures or I've got videos. I can make it viral. Or I know your secrets.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell everybody. Or I know where you are. I know where you live. I can tell your employer and they will sack you, won't have a job, you'll be homeless, penniless. Children is another thing people use as a tool. A lot of perpetrators, what they do is their behavior with their children is different.
Oh, yeah.
They are abusive to their spouse, but in front of the children, they're like, "Oh, I'm such a nice person."
Mm-hmm.
It's your mother who's evil. Or in the case where a man is being abused, the mother would be like, "Oh, your father is good for nothing,
Mm-hmm.
and he doesn't care about us," and always feeding the children with negativity,
Mm-hmm.
to such an extent that children become hostile towards one of the caregivers or one of the parents because of the brainwashing involved. So children are often used as a tool. People fear losing their children, so they're like, you know what, let's just stay in this abusive relationship.
Yeah.
At least I have my kids,
Mm-hmm.
at least my kids who are going to school, and, let my children grow up, get married, settle down. Then I'll leave. But they don't realize that as a result of that, you're doing two things. One, you have destroyed your children
Yeah.
in terms of their upbringing, their emotions, their mindsets, because the children grew up in a household where they've seen one parent abusing the other parent, or the grandparents abusing the parents, or what have you. And they have learned that this is okay. This is what relationships look like.
Yeah.
They normalize it. So when they do grow up, they end up getting married to someone who's similar to their caregiver
Mm.
in terms of habits,
So then
traits,
again,
personality.
repeating that cycle.
And the cycle is passed on. It's
Yeah.
repeated from one generation to another. Um, Another one is lack of support. A lot of people that do want to leave, trust me,
Mm-hmm.
they, they, they can't take it anymore. They've reached their breaking point and they are desperate to leave. But then the question is, where do I go?
Mm.
Yeah.
Especially if you're
For
in
example,
a place where you're not close to family or friends.
and sometimes, Hannah, even if your family is close by,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of parents, they don't want their daughters back
Yeah.
because for them it's a matter of shame, their reputation that, oh, my daughter has come back to us and now she and her kids will become a burden on us. So they literally tell their daughters that regardless of how you're being treated, regardless of what's happening or what's going on, you must stay and
Stay.
make it work because our doors are closed for you now. You can come and visit us, but you can't live here. You can't stay here. Or emotional blackmail that,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you've got younger sisters who are not married.
Yeah.
Nobody will get married to them if you come and sit at home with a divorce.
Yeah.
Um,
I find that one really
you
funny.
know, yeah, yeah, yeah. So a lot of times people don't have anywhere to go. They don't have a support system.
Yeah.
People are quite judgmental, or victim blaming is so common in our
Yep.
community, and so many other things. And another fear is, oh, I'll never get married again.
Mm-hmm.
So if I get a divorce, nobody's going to consider me again. Or if I have children, then nobody is going to get married to my kids, or nobody's going to get married to me because I've got kids. So the fear of living alone is more intense than the fear of living with a perpetrator.
Yeah.
Because what the perpetrator does to you, you are aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
You're familiar with that kind of abuse. But to go and live alone and not knowing what will happen, how they will navigate life, is far more fearful than the fear of living with somebody who's hurting you day and night.
The fear of the unknown.
So, absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, the list is endless.
Yeah. And you can feel all of this at once, right? Like you can have all of these feelings, like it's not separate. So you can have all of these reasons as well for not leaving. So you can have like a lack of support, you can have the emotional taunts, you can worry about your children. It's not all exclusive of each other, they can all exist together as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you did say when there are kids in a household where there's abuse going on, like among their parents, what impact does it have on the children? So you did mention that they grow up and they kind of repeat the cycle again. But what other impacts can it have?
So, there are lots of psychological factors and there are lots of physiological symptoms as well. If someone has been abused in their childhood, or if somebody has experienced adverse childhood, experiences, um, you will see a pattern in them that they will have some sort of anxiety or anxiety disorder
Mm-hmm.
as an adult. They may also show symptoms of depression, sometimes self-harming behavior, that can even lead to suicidal ideation. They will find it really difficult to trust people, which will make it difficult for them to form and maintain healthy relationships because they have only seen one thing growing up,
Yeah.
right? They have only lived in fear. So fear becomes like a part of their survival. So not interacting with people, becoming socially inhibited, these are all like um, coping mechanisms that they have learned over time.
Yeah.
That if I
Unhelpful
want
ones,
to
yeah.
be safe, if I want to look after myself, I should just stay away from people in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Or they become really, really sensitive, yeah, emotionally. They can get easily upset, easily hurt, easily offended by people's comments and behavior because they haven't really learned how to regulate their emotions. And their, parasympathetic nervous system has been so dysregulated as a result of living in constant fear
Mm-hmm.
that they get panic attacks every time they have to go in front of like somebody who's higher power or authority, for example, going for something as basic as a job interview. For them, it's pretty daunting
Yeah.
because as a child, they learn that when you're in front of somebody who's more powerful, who's bigger, You should keep quiet. You should not say anything. You should
Mm-hmm.
not answer back. So even going for a job interview is pretty daunting because even if they know all the answers, if
Yeah.
they know the right
Yeah.
answers, a part of them will prevent them from giving responses.
Yeah.
Um, Again, they might end up with coronary heart disease, autoimmune disease, kidney problems, stomach problems. A lot of people have IBS
Mm-hmm.
or IBD as a result of experiencing childhood trauma or childhood abuse, because obviously any form of abuse is a traumatic experience in itself. And there are tons of trauma responses that people show along the way, right? Easily becoming startled or jumpy, cold hands and
Mm-hmm.
feet, feeling nervous and shy and irritable, easily agitated, feeling angry, because the underlying emotion behind anger is grief.
Mm-hmm.
And I think grief is a natural uh, emotional response to losing a parent while they're still alive.
Mm.
So you know your parent is alive, but they're never there for you emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Your emotional needs have never been met. You could never have a deep conversation with your father or your mother because you feared them so much, because they never tried to understand you, or they never had the time, or they always were in a bad mood. They didn't want to hear anything,
Yeah.
right? Because in a healthy relationship, you practice active listening.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just disregard someone, or you don't just blame them for something that's gone wrong. Or even as a child, when you make mistakes, they acknowledge it, but then they give them chances, or they help them improve their behavior in a positive way, instead of using really harsh ways to discipline a child.
Yeah.
For example, punishing them or depriving them of food or basic things. Then the child learns that if I need something, I should just keep quiet and not express it,
Mm-hmm.
because there will be consequences. So your mind is programmed in such a way growing up, if you lived in a dysfunctional family uh, environment, that you cannot comprehend what healthy relationships look like now.
Mm.
So if anything good happens to you, you have this dreadful fear that something horrible is going to happen now.
Yeah. You're always on
Because,
kind of guard.
exactly, yeah, because you feel you are not worthy of love,
Mm-hmm.
appreciation, kindness, and goodness. So you fear good things to happen. You feel you're worth literally nothing and you don't deserve goodness. So you compromise on things that are good for you, but you just kind of justify it in your head. Oh, this is not for me.
Mm.
Oh, this can never happen to me, because you've never seen good outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
You've never seen good consequences of your actions and behavior. So as an adult, your self-esteem really, really becomes low.
Yeah.
Um, and there is no concept of self-love, because you believe be having self-love is being
Mm-hmm.
selfish, because that's what you were taught as a child. Um, and the other side of the coin is, if you have been raised by an abusive or a narcissistic parent or parents, you may also become an abuser in your adulthood,
Mm.
or you may become narcissistic as well. And sometimes you were not raised by abusive parents. You were not raised by narcissistic parents. In fact, your parents did everything for you, gave you everything. But in that process, you got spoiled,
Mm.
because you as a child learned that nobody says no to me.
Yeah.
I am given whatever I ask for. So you grow up with a sense of entitlement, that I should be given whatever I desire.
Mm-hmm.
And just like my parents never said no to me, my spouse should never say no to me either. Otherwise, I'll throw a tantrum.
Mm-hmm.
So you may be an adult, so you'll be a toddler in an adult's body.
Yeah.
You may be in your 20s or
Yeah.
30s, 40s, 50s, but you will have the accountability of a toddler
Mm-hmm.
because that's how you were raised. You were given everything, you had everything. So you don't know what sharing means.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what sacrifice means. You don't know what compromise or adjustment looks like. Um, and that self-centeredness and selfishness turns you into a really mean, horrible person, a bully
Yeah. So it's like
of
my
some
way or the
sort.
highway kind of thing.
Absolutely, absolutely.